is to recite the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. It reads as follows. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature, of nature's God, entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem more likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them to absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security, end quote. From the very inception of this country, our founding document illustrates multiple conundrums for the concept of our rights. First, the Declaration of Independence looks to the laws of nature and the bestowing power of the Creator as anchoring points for where our rights derive. You can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, that didn't slide. Okay, there we are. If our rights come from nature, human reason, and other phenomena in the world, then our rights are anchored in what we call natural law theory. This is a common theory taught in the philosophy of law that argues that whether by deep analysis of nature or deep introspection into the human condition, we can find objective truths about our morals, rights, and freedoms in the world. If our freedoms and rights are naturally in the world somewhere, then we either have, one, a discovery problem in that they are hard to find, two, an interpretation problem in that the debates over law insinuate a lack of clarity regarding these natural truths, or three, we have a cognitive problem or a flaw in our reasoning that hinders us from knowing our rights, who they belong to, and how to consistently protect them. This perspective is interesting, however, in the fact that if we adopt this position, all things that defy natural morals, values, truths, rights, etc., can be deemed as unnatural or against something that is universal. We must ask ourselves if the norm of this world that these basic precepts we take from nature, like not to harm or kill, to preserve life, etc., are in fact the norm, and we have a few unnatural hindrances that occur against it. Or is our history so latent with unnatural events that it begs the question if these morals are natural at all? How do we hold the position that our rights are natural and therefore inalienable in one hand, and wars, genocides, enslavements, kidnappings, forced relocations, and other human violations in the other? Is the battle against the unnatural, or is anchoring our rights in nature a point that fails in the context of our history? You can go to the next slide. Perhaps we should take a different approach and think of our rights not as nature in the cognitive sense, but nature in the sense of Spinoza, who asserted that there is only one universal substance through which we are all variances of, and that substance is God. That which is in you is in me, and in the trees, and in the road, and so on. This is called his monism, wherein he describes the, quote, unique, infinite, and necessary reality that constitutes everything in existence, which he calls God or nature, end quote. Perhaps we need God to anchor our rights. If you believe that morality, rights, and other issues of conduct and fair treatment are anchored in the commands of God, then you are embracing what we call divine command theory. However, this leads us to different problems. Is morality only accessible to the theist? How do we understand God with the problem of evil, where bad things happen in the world with the presence of an all-knowing, all-power, ever-present, benevolent God? Do we understand God's intentions for our rights when we cannot explicitly verify them with him or them? Divine command theory is interesting in the sense that it makes the infringement on human rights a spiritual violation. This is an interesting paradox, as so much violence in human history has been supported by alleged religious belief. Manifest destiny was described as a divine principle that cost the lives of so many indigenous people. Enslavement was undergirded by religious doctrine. The Crusades was a bloody war about the belief in God. Is it that our rights are divine, hence inalienable, and the violations of said rights are blasphemous, sacrilegious, and the actual definition of sin? If they are, then we are in a spiritual battle between the divine and the demonic is all that attempts to take away our divine rights, including those aspects of ourselves that engage in the termination of others' equality. If our rights are not divine, are the assaults on our rights spiritually permissible? Our answer to these questions will dictate if alienating rights is a cardinal spiritual offense or not. Next slide, please. Or perhaps, as this document symbolizes, rights are developed via human-made, socially constructed, contractual agreements wherein some freedoms are surrendered for the civility of the group. This is what we call social contract theory. John Locke, in particular, asserted that we had the right to life, liberty, and private property. Does that sound familiar? That is because Thomas Jefferson copied much of John Locke's work almost verbatim. John Locke believed that people were born as blank slates and that the role of government is to preserve our civility, and the moment it does not prioritize the freedom and rights of the people, it should be overtaken. He is the main theorist behind our three branches of government as a check and balance system so that the government of the people does not take away the rights of the people. However, we must hold John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, and all the others to the standard they present, that wealthy enslaving men gave us our precepts for morality and rights. These men offer important theories that we still engage with centuries later. However, the theory and the practice have never been in alignment. And perhaps that is because our rights are as fragile as the contractual agreement itself. Just as our Constitution needs amendment, so too might our rights be amendable if they are socially constructed. This is good in the sense that they can be shaped and molded and adjusted to new moments and standards in time. The hope is that as we progress as a nation, so might our rights. However, the inverse is also possible. That if we aim back to a previous time or to a previous way of being, so too might our rights be reversed. Socially constructed phenomena are real in the sense of our experience, but they are not objectively real in the world, and that is both a gate of opportunity and a vehicle of exploitation. If our rights can be reconstituted, then they are anchored only by who or what is in power. Perhaps we are watching the remolding of rights, and they are not inalienable as we once thought. In fact, they might be more like Play-Doh than bricks, more like rubber than cement. And if they are breakable or discardable, then that should scare us all. Next slide, please. I have only given you 3 options, but there are many more. However, I want to turn the question of justice and the fight for our rights as the new focal point. As I stated at the beginning of this talk, our rights in the Declaration of Independence asserts that if our rights are violated, we have a moral obligation to rebel. This coincides with what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his letter from a Birmingham jail, where he says, "Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law," end quote. You might disagree and say that standing up for our rights and justice should not cause consequence, especially if that's the foundation of our country and the fabric of our rights themselves. He would actually agree with that assessment. However, King posits this not to support the law's recoil when unjust laws are defied, but to address that defending one's rights must come with an acceptance of consequences. In any system of domination, change will be met with resistance. If we care deeply about our rights, we must be willing to get dirty. Otherwise, our rights will bend to the shape of those who are in power. Rights will only be given to the select few instead of the entirety of those who deserve them by natural, divine, or constructed designations. If rights are natural or divine, then they know no citizenship. If they are socially constructed, then they must be held to the precepts clearly and consistently, and the infringement upon the social agreement is adequate justification for revolution. Next slide, please. Perhaps Anna Julia Cooper, in her book, A Voice from the South, was correct in stating that, quote, "For a woman's cause is the cause of the weak. And when all the weak shall have received their due consideration, then woman will have her rights. The Indian will have his rights. The Negro will have his rights. And all the strong will have learned at last to deal justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. And our fair land will have been taught the secret of universal courtesy, which after all, nothing but the art, the science, and the religion of regarding one's neighbor as oneself. And to do for him as we would do, were conditions swapped, that he do for us," end quote. She alludes to the golden rule here. And the golden rule is one of the moral doctrines we find in nature, in divine texts across many religions, and in certain parts of our social contract. However, it centers our view of self as moral justification for our neighbor's rights. I challenge us not only to see ourselves in the other, but to also see the other as embedded with rights despite our capacity for empathy. I challenge us to think about the other as having inalienable rights that are not predicated upon what we want done for us, but them having rights that are predicated upon some metaphysical principle that humans should have, period, regardless of our perceptions of them. Only then can we truly bring justice forward. Last slide, please. Perhaps we should reflect upon the words of W.E.B. Du Bois from his book, Black Reconstruction, that, quote, "We think of oppression beyond all conception, cruelty, degradation, whipping, and starvation, the absolute negation of human rights. Or on the contrary, we may think of the ordinary worker the world over today, slaving 10, 12, or 14 hours a day with not enough to eat, compelled by his physical necessities to do this and not do that, curtailed in his movements and his possibilities, and we say here too is a slave called a free worker, and slavery is merely a matter of name," end quote. If by our economic condition or our susceptibility to harm, we are all enslaved to the powers that be, what stops our coalition for the defense of our rights? Why do we see ourselves so differently from the other? Why do we allow moral indictments against certain people to nullify their fundamental human rights that know no citizenship? Sorry, there we go. If the criminal is owed certain fundamental freedoms as the non-criminal, then we must seriously consider that actions do not nullify rights. And in such a scenario, there is much more that binds us all together than separates us. I believe that once we come to the realization that we all lose in this situation, womb-having people, queer people, marginalized racial identities, middle and lower socioeconomic classes, the elderly and children, the underpaid and unemployed, the religious and non-religious, the disabled and ill, the neurodivergent, the non-citizen and the citizen, and above all of these markers of marginality, we are all members of those that may question power. Because of these things, we are all in similar danger. Our rights are all contestable, and once we realize that, a new dawn breaks for who we can become. However, we must strategize from margin to center and ensure that all rights are preserved. Because just as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. articulated, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The same principle applies to our rights. When a threat to our rights happens anywhere, the door opens for all of our rights to come into question. So this is my beckoning call to this Unitarian space, that as we all exist in different beliefs and walks of life, making the decision to do life together, we must operate with an understanding that the person's rights that are under fire are both a threat to my own and a moral wrong in and of themselves. And I have a moral obligation to take a stand. Thank you.